choose to be the guardians at the gate. But there is no one else. We do not want an expanding struggle with consequences that no one can foresee, nor will we bluster or bully or flaunt our power. But we will not surrender, and we will not retreat. Strengthened by that promise, the people of South Vietnam have fought for many long years. Thousands of them have died. Thousands more have been crippled and scarred by war. And we just cannot now dishonor our word or abandon our commitment or leave those who believed us and who trusted us to the terror and repression and murder that would follow. This then, my fellow Americans, is why we're in Vietnam.
That's me with my M60 machine gun and a .45 pistol on my right hip. We carried ammunition that way, bandolier style, because you had to displace the weight somewhat. If you carried a whole package of ammunition, it just put too much weight on one spot. Well, I actually carried more than that, plus the rucksack, and I weighed about 155 pounds there. I was 6'2", and by the time we got all our weight on us, we were almost carrying our weight half the time. I was trying to remember, I think we flew into, on Braniff Airlines to Benoit, I believe. And we went to get something to eat, and we had a rocket attack, 122 millimeter rockets. And we're all new guys. We're sitting there, I said, boy, this is what it's like. Then we went to Long Binh, and we stood in formations of about 1,000 guys, and every morning they would read off who was going to which unit. Whichever unit suffered the most casualties the previous week, 101st Airborne, whatever, I ended up in the 4th Infantry Division. This picture was taken inside a Huey as we were taking off for a combat assault. I have no idea why we're smiling.
Meanwhile, in this jungle war, the United States is becoming more fully involved with each passing day. American combat troops join with South Vietnamese and Australian forces.
I had met a couple of different friends of mine that had served, and they told me about us. I was just a gun-ho kid and wanted to go see what it was about. I graduated in June and left for Fort Jackson, South Carolina in September. The following June, from 2 days of graduation, I landed in Vietnam. I just turned 19. I went as a replacement troop, and I went in and I was an infantry. I was a grunt with a big red one, and so I didn't go as a group. I was kind of by myself, and I was put in a unit. And I remember when I got there, and I arrived with about 5 or 6 different guys that were in the same boat that I was with. They give us our gear, and I remember it was all mud, all dirt. There was some blood on the rifle, and I took my training with an M14. I never seen an M16 till I got in country.
When I was drafted, I believed, and still seriously believe, it was service to my country and one definite good experience that I didn't think I'd ever get otherwise. And I made the best of it. And
my oldest friend,
just made the best of it.
Who I know from when I'm 12 years old. We're talking on the phone. He lives out in California, and he's telling me he's got a horse and he takes part in these parades and all that. And he says to me, Kenya, I'm a patriot. I said, really? I said, Artie, you kind of forget who you're talking to. I know you from when we're 12 years old. And you may be a patriot, but you're a draft-dodging patriot. I got drafted. I figured, well, my life is over. that's really how I thought about it. Who the hell ever heard of Vietnam back then?
Yeah.
When I got drafted, I said, well, do I have a choice?
I didn't have a problem with it. I understood what the draft was all about. I didn't have a problem with it. Did I really want to go? No. When the call came, I went. When I graduated high school '64, there wasn't a lot about Vietnam going on. It wasn't frontline news, in other words. But the draft, everybody was trying to scare you to death with the draft. You know, if you're not going to college, you know, and you don't have a deferment, you're not married with 10 kids, you're going in the military. I don't know, okay. Well, it was almost 2 years before I finally got the draft after graduating from high school. I didn't get drafted till '66, January of '66. And you know, you didn't hear all that much about it, even in the military. In basic, you know, you were just doing your job and going through the ropes. And then when I graduated from AIT out of Fort Eustis, Virginia, I got shipped to Germany. Hey, I was one lucky guy. You know, there was a lot of rumors. You know, once in a while you'd run into somebody who had come home from Vietnam, early servers, and you know, all that bad, hot, filthy, a lot of hoes, you know, things like that. And it just kind of went by the wayside. The reality struck when you got there. That's when reality struck.
I volunteered at the age of 17, the day I turned 17.
Where did you fly into?
We didn't fly, we took a transport, 5,000 of us on a military transport ship called the General Leroy L. Chinge. Took us 32 days to get there, and when we did, we went over the side, got into LCMs and LCUs, and attacked the beach, to which we were fired on each way.
I was in the field less than a week before I seen my first KIA. Guy stepped on a landmine a few feet in front of me. That was a wake-up call for me. It was, welcome to the infantry, welcome to the jungle. We lived in the jungle most of the time. We'd go out 2-3 weeks at a time. Then we'd come in for 4 or 5 days, get rested up, and then go back out. I pulled a lot of night ambushes, initiated a few of them. I didn't like that because sometimes they didn't get killed instantly and they lay there crying and you couldn't give up your position. So you just held tight until the next morning. I remember one night we were on an ambush patrol. We went out, it was actually like my first or second ambush I was ever on. And we went out and we set up in the ruins of an old village and it was pouring down rain. And it was lightning and it light up just like daylight, right? And I remember laying in the doorway and it was like a little step, probably an 8-inch step going into it, but there was no roof on it or anything. And that was my position. And I was supposed to watch this trail. And you could see probably 70, 80 yards in both directions. It was kind of an open clearing where this village was. And all of a sudden, I looked, and we'd been there probably a couple hours, and I seen some guys coming. And I thought, what the hell? And then I waited for the next lightning, and there wasn't 4 or 5, there was like 20 or 30 of them. But they walked by us, and they were, oh my God, we were outnumbered, I figured 10 to 1. And so there had to have been 60 of them anyway. Yeah, they were in VA and Viet Cong. And they were carrying a lot of stuff. They had these long bars between them with sacks on, carrying stuff. And they were so focused, I was from here, probably to them sandbags away from them when they walked by my position. And the trail turned to mud, and it was actually splashing and hitting me. So after they all went by and went into the woods, they called, Sergeant Wilson called artillery in. And of course the first one fell short in behind us. But you know what what we always said? That was giving them the wake-up call to get the hell out before the next one came. I ran into the first sergeant, he says, Captain Hill wants to see you. And I says, Sergeant, I said, I don't know what's going on. I said, I'm supposed to have the first few hours off today. I've been up all night. And so I got into Captain Hill's bunker, and I said, "Good morning, sir." He said, "Okay, how you doing?" I said, "Sir," I said, "you know I've been out on ambush all night." He said, "I don't give a shit where you've been. I know where you're going." And I said, "Sir," I said, He said, "Get your shit together. We got a resupply convoy returning." And he says, "You're going back to Like at the base camp. There's a guy by the name of Bob that wants to see your ass tomorrow night." And I said, "I don't know any Bob back here." He said, "You asshole." He said, "You're going to go see the Bob Hope show. Go get your shit together and go in." So I got my shit together, jumped in the back of the ass end of a deuce and a half, laid my head back. The sun was shining, and I thought, my feet were still soaking wet. I was relaxed. Got a nice warm shower, got a nice warm meal, got some clean clothes to put on. Had to go fight with one of the rear echelon guys that stole my mattress to get my mattress back on my cot. And got a good night's sleep. And the next day, that afternoon, they came, they got us, and there was about 18 of us, I'm going to say, that they brought in from the field. And they marched us in. We got there, and there was just guys hanging off the trees and all over it. And I thought, shit, where the hell are we going to set? This place is packed. They marched us right down in the front. The first 5 rows Bob Hope had reserved for us guys in the field to see the show. And I was the 3rd row back, 3rd guy in.
It's not that I'm not, and it's just that I'm not in the market for a boy who wants to love.
I got to see Raquel Welch, almost close enough to smell her perfume.
Bob Hope, yeah, he would introduce Miss Universe, Raquel Welch, Joey Heatherton, and said, "I just wanted to show you guys what you're fighting for."
Yeah, that's what he said. "I want to show you guys what you're fighting for." Everybody started cheering and rooting, you know. But they announced that Bob Hope had reserved all these seats in the front for the guys that had been in the bush and just come back. And he said, and they'll be returning tomorrow morning back to the bush. And sure as shit, we were back to the bush.
We formed a new platoon in the 1st of the 8th Infantry, which was a recon unit. And I was sent originally to a fire base called Fire Base 29. It was around Doctow. And basically, the enemy never left that area. And Fire Base 29 had been hit many, many times. And my first night there, they sent me out on night listening position, which was basically 4 guys go out in 4 different directions, northeast, south, and west. And you're there to kind of, be the eyes and ears of the rest of the camp in case there's an attack. And it was monsoon season, and I ended up, we were in a crater, and I'm a new guy, and we're trying to sleep in 4 or 5 inches of water, and there was artillery fire of some kind that night, maybe a mortar attack, I don't know. And being a new guy, I was on the radio, and I had no idea what it was. I remember calling in, and the captain said, "Well, what's going on?" I think he said Red Dog. And I said, "What the hell was that?" I have no idea. He says, "Artillery fire." I said, "Well, yeah, it sounds like it."
Yeah, I wound up being on a gun section with 2 8-inch howitzers. I ran into somebody that I knew from the States, and he was ready to go home, and he was a computer figuring out what shoot data to send to the guns. I meet him and I tell him, "Yeah, I'm on a gun section." He said, "You're on a gun section with everything that you know?" He brings me over to this lieutenant in the headquarters battery, and he says, "This is Ken Krieger, he's my replacement." That's exactly how that happened.
So he gave you a job, huh?
In the one day, I left Charlie Battery with the 8-inch. We had 2 8-inch and 2 175 guns, 2 8-inch howitzers.
Yeah.
So in one day I left that, and now I'm on the computing shoot data for the guns. They would be calling up on the radio sometime, and I got the phone talking to the guns, and this guy, "Get some rounds on here, we're being overrun."
Yeah. Yeah.
And he's giving me coordinates where shoot upon, and I go over to the table like this but bigger, and I said, Jesus Christ, that guy is giving me his own coordinates to fire on. Yeah, you really had the guys were almost hysterical, you know.
Yeah,
you know,
got it screwed up.
and he's giving me the coordinates of where he is. So I say, so I had to ask him, what direction are you from the enemy coming in? He gives me that direction, so I put a margin of, and then had him shooting so the rounds would land a little behind them, and then we would adjust it so that we're landing rounds between the Special Forces camp and the Viet Cong. And I remember once this Captain Hudson, I had the shoot data done. I had already talked to the guy doing the same job as me in the battery, you know. And I said, Captain, shouldn't we be checking data? He says, we already did that. So we hear, boom, boom. He had sent the wrong data to the wrong guns. So now we're in a panic going over to that old French map and seeing if we have a red circle there to show that that's a do not fire zone.
Sometimes you walk point. It depended on which squad had point and which guy in the squad had point. And one day we didn't have point, another squad had point, and we had a dog handler. And with a German Shepherd, as a matter of fact, walking point. And they walked by a cross trail, perpendicular to the trail we were on. The gooks were set up on the cross trail. They let the dog handler walk through with the dog, and then they killed our point man and shot another guy, wounded him. They figured we'll get more this way than if we just shoot the dog and the dog handler, which they did. That was pretty much you try to not to stay on trails, but you had no choice. You can't walk through the jungle. You try to cut your way through with a machete, you'd be there for days.
Yeah.
When you get shot like that, you kind of start to worry about you worry when you're walking down the bush. You worry about getting hit. For me, I worry about getting hit again. I don't intend for that to happen again. But you can never tell. You feel that there's somebody after you, specifically just you, because you're short. They don't want nobody else, they just want you.
I think most of the guys thought that you're not going to survive if there's a bullet out there with your name on it. And it's like, it's just a matter of luck that day who was walking point. On another occasion, we were set up on a new fire base. The 105 battery had already set up, and they only had maybe one platoon up there to guard them. So we came across from another hill, and the only thing we had to protect us, no bunkers, just concertina wire set up. And we got hit that night, and me and my buddy, Jeff Brown, we were set up. You take two ponchos and you put them together, then you got a little bit of a tent with two guys. And everybody was doing that. We were pretty strung out because we didn't have a lot of guys. And the one next to us was probably, 20 yards away maybe. And they got hit with a B-40 rocket, and both of them got killed. And then we had a firefight that night, and there was few dead bodies strewn around the next day outside the wire. They didn't get through the wire, but their rockets and the machine guns did. Mm-hmm. And then that same day, I've got a picture of the helicopters, a Chinook that got shot down. Mm-hmm. And right in the broad daylight, a couple of gooks stood up with AK-47s. He shot the Chinook down and brought in a water tanker dropped the water tanker off, tried to take off, and nobody was killed on it because they lost power, whatever they did to it, and landed in the jungle. And they sent our platoon out to secure the area. But the elephant grass, which would grow, my God, 12 feet high, I guess, I mean, taller than a man, caught fire, and the fire caught the Chinook, and we were running away from it as it blew up. About $3 million back then worth of machinery. This is a bridge, a pontoon bridge that we were guarding. And as the convoys went by, they threw out meat. They had packages of hamburger and everything, so we did a lot of cooking for the Vietnamese kids that were hanging around that area.
What was like the relationship with the kids?
Oh, wonderful. We gave them whatever we had. Yeah, they always needed something or wanted something, so we gave it to them. We could always get resupplied, but they couldn't.
And I used to say the Hershey candy bars, when we'd go on village sweeps, we'd go in and all those little kids were, I felt so bad for the kids, though. They were all scared to death of us and stuff, you know. And I would give my Hershey bars to the kids. And 90% of the time they wouldn't take it, so I just laid on the dirt floor in their hooches or whatever. And then when I leave, you could hear them in there fighting over it. You know? But I felt bad for the kids, so I always tried to save them for a peace treaty thing like with them, you know.
We had a lot of kids, and they were always looking for a handout. They weren't starving, and of course, being Americans, GIs, we had big hearts, and we were always giving them something.
That's right.
But two things that they absolutely hated, we used to have in our sea rations a chocolate bar. It was a round chocolate disc, sort of like a peppermint patty, but it didn't have any peppermint. It was just hard chocolate. And we used to throw that off at them, and they'd throw it back at us.
Really?
Oh, it was terrible.
Well, not the kids.
Oh, they wouldn't take that in a heartbeat. They used to throw them things back at the GIs all the time. So, you know, but that you know, they were always looking for something. They'd buy, sell, trade, whatever. Our garbage and stuff was always scavenged by the Vietnamese people. A lot of times that would be turned into devices that would kill us. Once we caught up with all that, the units that had regulations about, you know, getting rid of your waste and stuff, and not allowing the Vietnamese people on the dumps, and
because they were afraid that the ones who were doing all the picking were Viet Cong.
Or they were selling it or giving it to the Viet Cong, and they're making weapons out of it to kill us.
We ended up running 4-man patrols off that base for about 3 months. My best friend was killed on one. He's a guy who wanted to go on R&R with me. And the experience on that was we were going out from Firebase 29. It was November. 4 of us were going out, and those we were coming back. They were coming out to replace us after 2 nights. And we met halfway on the trail, sat down, shot the shit for a while, and then we went back to the base camp, or the fire base, 29. And about 15 minutes later, we heard small arms fire. He was hit in the head. He died immediately. The other 3 guys were all wounded, and we managed to medevac them all out. But it's pretty much, that's what we were in the 4th Division, recon units. I was never in a major battle on the fringe of them, but most of our casualties were small ambushes, and that could happen any day. And I spent the entire year in the jungle because I was never wounded. This is probably monsoon season on Firebase 29. This is a 4-man patrol, the 1st of the 8th Infantry, 4th Infantry Division going out. Can't remember the names of all the guys, but this guy here with the beret on is Larry Conklin. He was one of the wounded where my best friend got killed on that other patrol. And he got a Silver Star for what he did that day. He went to Japan, got healed, came back. And he was killed in March. This is November. He died in March. He's buried in Endicott, New York. And I went up a couple of years ago to see his grave. Actually talked to his father, who was a World War II veteran. And when I mentioned that I knew Larry, I should have called him many years before that. He cried over the phone. Okay, I'll show you this picture. The guy on the right, the kid, I think he was 18 years old. He was a nice guy, but a bit of a wise guy. And we were on a mountaintop someplace. The night listening position was out probably 100 yards. This is the hard one. I don't know who the guys were. When you were out there, you didn't talk on the radio. You did something called sit reps. You just broke squelch every half hour to let the people with the radio back with the captain know that you were still out there and somebody was awake. They weren't doing that. They sent this kid down to wake him up. And the guys weren't asleep. Their radio was broken. Everybody thought that he went down and he's trick, trying to pretend he was the enemy, wake them up. They weren't asleep. He got killed by friendly fire. There were a lot of friendly fire casualties. It happened all the time. I remember every morning, at least in my unit, when we got up about daylight, somebody would always say, "It looks like a good day to die."
I was there for the 68 test. I lost one of my best friends. He was walking point. He asked me to swap with him. He was supposed to went out on night ambush that night, and he came into our bunker and wanted to know if anybody would swap with him because he wasn't feeling good. And his name was Huberto Ortega. So I did, because he was a good guy, and he wouldn't have been asking if he didn't mean it. So the next morning, I was coming in from the night ambush, and I seen him. He had to walk point for the mine sweepers to take the tracks out that morning. And I seen him getting around and going out, and he kind of gave me a low hand salute. I came in through the concertina wire on the one side with 4 other guys. It was a 5-man ambush. We didn't initiate that ambush that night, even though there was a lot of movement because it was during the 68 test. They walked right into an ambush. They didn't go 70 yards, and Huberto was cut right down. And I was so friggin' devastated when that happened. I ran. They had the tracks lined up, and everybody was just scattering. And I remember I ran, and I jumped up on the back of the tank and jabbed it, and I could see different guys running, and I could see 2 of the Viet Congs running, but I never got a shot off, and I always felt so bad. And then I was off the tank. I heard they had a KI, and I knew it was Huberto. I went out, and I was so devastated, I couldn't even help load him on the dust off when they brought the dust off. And years ago, I couldn't even talk about this, but I've had so much healing from it. When I came home, it was my bucket list to go see his mom and dad and his family, tell them what happened. And back in the 70s, you didn't have the internet or anything like we have today. And I wrote the San Antonio Chamber of Commerce. They never wrote me back. I called a couple of times. They never returned my call. And then I had a friend of mine that had a son in the 80s that was stationed in the Air Force in San Antonio. And he sent me a phone book. And do you know how many Ortegas there are in San Antonio? In that phone book? And I started calling. I did every afternoon. I'd start calling. And some of them couldn't even really speak English, and none of them knew they were related and didn't know anything about it and stuff. And so I kind of give that up. And then about 5 years, 6, 7 years ago, let's say 7 years now, my daughter seen a picture of Huberto posted on a Facebook page. And so she tagged me in it. So I wrote the guy that posted it. He wanted to know how I knew him, and I said I was with him when he fell. So he said, give me your phone number. So I gave him my phone number, and he called me, and we got to talking, and come to find out there was 23 kids from his high school that were killed in Vietnam. And he said that he knew Huberto, but Huberto was 2 years ahead of him in school. But this guy, his name was Charlie Condon, and he was a retired San Antonio police officer for the San Antonio Police Department. He was a police investigator. And he said, I will find, he has a twin sister. And I said, I knew he had a sister, but I didn't know they were twins. He never said that. Close to a year went by, and I sat there one night with my wife, and she just made us a dish of ice cream. And the phone rang, and it said, Charlie Condon, San Antonio, Texas. And I thought, holy shit. So I answered the phone, and it's Charlie. And he said, Dale, he said, I got good news. He said, I located Huberto's sister for you. I said, you're kidding. He said, no. He said, I talked to her, I told her your story, and he said, she's interested in talking to you. I said, well, I would love to talk to her. And he said, well, hang on, I'll put her on the phone. And I was devastated. I didn't know what to say. So she got on the phone, she started asking me all these questions, and I said, Maria, I said, rather than telling you what happened with your brother and stuff, I said, I would like to come to San Antonio and see you personally. So about 4 months later, 5 months, I was on a plane flying to San Antonio. And I got there, her son picked me up at the airport, and we went to her house, and we talked and stuff, and I said, you know, I was said, Maria, let's do it tomorrow. I'll meet with you, and we'll do lunch or something or whatever. And she said, well, why don't we go to the cemetery? I said, I would love to. I had a friend of mine, Frank Barber, he went with me. And the next morning they came and picked us up, and we went to the cemetery, and that's where I told her what happened. She said that they told her that he was killed by a sniper with one shot to the head, and I said, no. I said, he was almost cut in half, just above the hips. And I said, and the machine gun, he was carrying the M60, and it was just riveted with lead. You couldn't even use it. I lived with survivor's guilt. That's what they ended up calling it for so many years. And she says, don't you ever feel guilty about it. She says, it wasn't your turn. It was God's choice, and it was my brother's turn and not yours, so don't you ever feel bad about it. And she told me that right there at the foot of his grave. And I don't know, just something inside of me just changed it. And she gave me a big hug. Just a little Mexican girl, you know, hugging this big goat. I felt so different about it. We went to the wall one time, years after I got married, and my son was about 5 years old, so my daughter would have been about 12. And we went to the wall. We was coming back from Florida, from down to Disneyland. They seen the Washington Monument, so they wanted, well, we had time, we was going around the Beltway, so I said, okay. So we got there, well, then all of a sudden I found the Vietnam Wall, and I wasn't even thinking about going there. It was right there in front of me, you know. And my daughter and my wife said, let's go to the wall. And I was thinking, am I ready for this? I don't know. You know, I put this whole thing behind me for so many years, because there's 63 guys from my unit. I didn't know them all, but I knew a lot of them that was on that wall.
Then you would tell people, when you go, if you're going to go to the wall for the first time, don't go yourself.
I'll tell anybody, don't go alone, because I started walking down in there, and I looked, and I seen all these names, and it was just like a huge funeral, a huge graveyard or something. I don't know, I just felt so much death around me and stuff. And my daughter says, and wife said, Dad, I found Huberto's name on that. And I seen it, and I just started crying. I got so weak, I buckled at the knees. The park rangers had to come and help me get up and get out of there. And I remember my son saying to my wife, Mommy, what's the matter with Daddy? What's wrong with Dad? I was ever overwhelmed with emotion since Huberto was killed that I just couldn't, I had no control over what I was doing. He wasn't the first guy I seen killed, but it was the circumstances of it and he wasn't the last.
This wall represents the 32 lives that were given in the Vietnam War from Chemung County. And it is the Wall of Honor. These are the heroes. The rest of us are not heroes. These are the heroes. Richie Barnes, as I said, was my childhood friend. Grew up with me, a couple years older. Wall down here to Gordon Hoover. Okay, Gordon Hoover was killed on probably the worst night of my life, too, which was January 31st, 1968, and that was the first night of the Tet Offensive. It was living hell throughout the whole country for everybody. Army, Marines, Navy, Coast Guard, didn't matter. They attacked us all, and it was an awful, awful night. Gordon Hoover, he was a gunny sergeant in the United States Marine Corps, was killed up near, I believe, Ann Lock. Near the DMZ with the Marines. Brewer, Eddie Brewer, was killed in 68, June. Brewer Stadium at Notre Dame High School is named in his honor. Moving down the line, we go down to Carl Raymond. Carl was a Navy corpsman with the Marines in Vietnam. He was severely wounded twice. He refused his own medical care, saved 8 more Marines that day before he was actually severely wounded again and bled out and died. A true hero. Should have been a Medal of Honor recipient in my opinion, but that's how it went down the line. Major Robert H. Schuler Jr. grew up on Comfort Hill Road, first farm in the town of Ashland. On Comfort Hill Road off Route 14, went to Southside High School, was a very good student and a very good athlete at the school. He went on, he did 1 year at Cornell University. He moved on down and went to the University of Maryland where he graduated, and then he went on to the Air Force and became a pilot. The aircraft at that time was probably the prominent aircraft used by the Air Force in Vietnam. It was more of an interceptor aircraft, if you will, for the bigger bomber aircraft that were going in. They jammed the radar, so they couldn't track the other aircraft coming in and blow them out of the sky with their SAM missiles, and that was part of his job. Well, his partner, his wingman, got shot down. Major Schuler stayed in the area, circling that area to identify where his wing pilot might have landed as he parachuted from his aircraft. He was recovered, and Major Schuler was a captain at the time. His aircraft either ran out of fuel or was shot down. They were still unsure about that, and I don't know whether they know to this day exactly what happened. He did not survive the crash. In fact, when they found his crash site in 2004, I believe it was, some of his remains were still intact with the aircraft. Once they recovered those remains and parts of the aircraft, positively identified it, then they had to do the DNA. And that's how they made contact with me, because we had named our chapter here the Major Robert H. Schuler Jr. Chapter 803 of the Vietnam Veterans of America in honor of Bob. And because there was just really no recognition for him. He wasn't declared dead at that time, and just the forgotten ones have always been the POWMIAs, which is sad. But anyway, they made contact with me. With that, we got in contact with the nephew, Major Schuler's nephew, his brother Dick's son, Fred. Fred Schuler lived in Omaha, Nebraska. We got Fred in contact with the DOD, and then it went from there. They got a hair follicle from Major Schuler's brother, Dick, Fred's father, and they positively identified the bone fragments and stuff that they recovered from the crash site as Major Schuler, and then we brought him home in 2006 to bury him. This is the POW table. Okay, the POW-MIA table is significant in the fact that we do now have a national organization called the POW-MIA Committee, and they do recognize all these people that have been lost in all wars. And they go all the way back to the Revolutionary War, where we lost people that represented our country that were never, their remains were never recovered, okay, or the site where they might possibly be interned. That's why it's so important to have this as a national organization now to follow up on any soldiers, and we've had them recently from the different actions that are going on within our country now. Vietnam War, I think we're down to about 14 or 1,500 right now. I'm not positive on the exact number, but I know we are below, we're below 1,700, I believe, as still listed in action from Southeast Asia, not just Vietnam. Because we lost guys in Cambodia, we lost guys in Thailand, in the South China Sea, not on land, but in the sea. Their remains were never recovered. So they are still listed as POW-MIAs. So these are the 32 guys that we honor very proudly here that served our country from Chemung County and passed while in the service with our country.
Well, let us turn now to the fundamental issue. Why and how did the United States become involved in Vietnam in the first place? 15 years ago, North Vietnam, with the logistical support of Communist China and the Soviet Union, launched a campaign to impose a communist government on South Vietnam by instigating and supporting a revolution. In response to the request of the government of South Vietnam, President Eisenhower sent economic aid and military equipment to assist the people of South Vietnam in their efforts to prevent a communist takeover. 7 years ago, President Kennedy sent 16,000 military personnel to Vietnam as combat advisors. 4 years ago, President Johnson sent American combat forces to South Vietnam. Now, many believe that President Johnson's decision to send American combat forces to South Vietnam was wrong. And many others, I among them, have been strongly critical of the way the war has been conducted. But the question facing us today is, now that we are in the war, what is the best way to end it? In January, I could only conclude that the precipitate withdrawal of all American forces from Vietnam would be a disaster not only for South Vietnam, but for the United States and for the cause of peace. For the South Vietnamese, our precipitate withdrawal would inevitably allow the communists to repeat the massacres which followed their takeover in the North 15 years before. They then murdered more than 50,000 people, and hundreds of thousands more died in slave labor camps. We saw a prelude of what would happen in South Vietnam when the communists entered the city of Hue last year. During their brief rule there was a bloody reign of terror in which 3,000 civilians were clubbed, shot to death, and buried in mass graves. With the sudden collapse of our support, these atrocities of Hue would become the nightmare of the entire nation.
And then I was at some political thing going on, and there was an old guy there, and he was calling us baby killers. So I went over to him and I confronted him about that. I said, "Don't ever use that expression again."
Yeah.
Because it will not be welcomed.
Right.
And even though I was against the war, but I didn't like that.
Right. And I think the big thing that we all recognize, okay, as veterans, all right, is the fact that we could have taken care of that. We could have defeated them handily, but we were not allowed because of political ramifications, okay? The politics got into the war to start us there through Eisenhower. Actually, it started back in 46 after the war when Truman was president. And we made a commitment to the French. I mean, the French helped us out of, what, 2 or 3 wars? And then we helped them out of 2 big wars. All of a sudden, it was a tit for tat sort of thing, in my opinion. Okay, we had to help the French. Okay, they wanted to recolonialize after World War II their colony, which they'd had since the 1800s, okay, of the Republic of Vietnam. They were making money off that, and it was all about the buck. And when the war ended, they wanted their colony back, so, you know, they had control. And the Vietnamese people wanted their own control. Ho Chi Minh came to the United States before he ever became communist indoctrinated and asked for help to unite the country and be Vietnamese ruled. But we turned them down. We said, no, we're going to continue to support the French.
And Ho Chi Minh was their George Washington as far as they were concerned.
Certainly.
Yep.
Did I hate the guy? I didn't hate Ho Chi Minh. Hell, I didn't even know the guy. But you know what? When I came home from Vietnam and I got out of the service, one of the things that really upset me a lot was that people called us the baby killers and why were we in Vietnam and blah, 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 blah. We were there because we supported our country, the United States of America. And the politicians that were running our country turned us on to the Vietnamese people to stop the spread of communism. We went, most of us went, and we did our job. You know, we all had feelings about it one way or another, but we all went and did our job.
I have asked for this radio and television time tonight for the purpose of announcing that we today have concluded an agreement to end the war and bring peace with honor in Vietnam and in Southeast Asia. The following statement is being issued at this moment in Washington and Hanoi. At 12:30 Paris time today, January 23, 1973, the agreement on ending the war and restoring peace in Vietnam was initialed by Dr. Henry Kissinger on behalf of the United States and Special Advisor Lee Duc Tho on behalf of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam. The agreement will be formally signed by the parties participating in the Paris Conference on Vietnam on January 27, 1973 at the International Conference Center in Paris. The ceasefire will take effect at 2400 Greenwich Mean Time, January 27, 1973. The United States and the Democratic Republic of Vietnam express the hope that this agreement will ensure stable peace in Vietnam and contribute to the preservation of lasting peace in Indochina and Southeast Asia. Within 60 days from this Saturday, all Americans held prisoners of war throughout Indochina will be released. There will be the fullest possible accounting for all of those who are missing in action. During the same 60-day period, all American forces will be withdrawn from South Vietnam. The people of South Vietnam have been guaranteed the right to determine their own future. Now that we have achieved an honorable agreement, let us be proud that America did not settle for a peace that would have betrayed our allies, that would have abandoned our prisoners of war, or that would have ended the war for us but would have continued the war for the 50 million people of Indochina. Let us be proud of the 2.5 million young Americans who served in Vietnam. who served with honor and distinction in one of the most selfless enterprises in the history of nations. And let us be proud of those who sacrificed, who gave their lives, so that the people of South Vietnam might live in freedom, and so that the world might live in peace.
Did we do anything there besides lose a lot of guys? We didn't accomplish anything because we didn't finish it. We left. And we left badly to have those Vietnamese people that helped us out hanging on skids of helicopters trying to get out. The Vietnamese were a little, they probably executed some, but they were a little more tolerant with, they re-educated them or whatever they do, but nothing like what happened in Cambodia with Pol Pot, where he killed half the population. But I wish we had at least done a better job, which I don't think we did. Yeah, a lot of people were unnecessarily, they died. Where we were, there were Montagnards. They fought with us. They fought with with the Green Berets. They were very good fighters, but we just left them and to the Vietnamese government. Didn't take them out. We should have. They were good people.
We did precisely what everybody else did. We got up and run away, let the Vietnamese come to their own ending. We ran away. It was all politically induced. They lied about why we started the war. They lied all the way through the war. And at the end of the war, they lied because they said they did it with honor. There was no honor in the way we left Vietnam.
But we left there with our tails between our legs. And we didn't like that.
No.
That isn't how it's supposed to have been. And then we come home, and we didn't get any hero's greeting. Not that we were looking to be heroes, but we certainly didn't get a welcome home.
Very little support or very little recognition did we get as an individual. But even yesterday, a fellow come up to me, I had probably this military hat on, and he said, "Did you serve?" And I said, "Yes." And he says, "Thank you so much."
But
I appreciate it.
We get that a lot now.
We do.
You know, I mean, that's great that the country's finally recognizing those of us that did serve did a job that our country asked us to do.
Guy would come over to me because I'm wearing a hat like that or something and said, "Thank you for your service."
Right.
The first time that happened, I'm like,
yeah.
It's the same thing every
Right.
day.
I don't think we belong there. I never will. While I'm there, I'm going to do my job the absolute best I can possibly do it because I'm saving our guys' lives.
We weren't heroes. We just did what we were told to do. We weren't. Sure, there were some heroic actions that happened during the war because there's medals of honor, silver stars, bronze stars. But as far as being heroes, no, I don't think, no.
That word is, to me, really overused in our culture.
We're not heroes. Anybody you see in this room, we served, we did our job. We're not heroes, okay? I really get upset when everybody's called a hero now, okay? Most of your newscasters, oh, this guy was a hero, and that guy was a hero, and this baseball player's a hero. No, they're not. These are heroes. Those that gave their lives for their country are heroes.
No, I just consider myself a soldier. I got drafted, and I just did what I had to do. But they did something far beyond what anybody else did, but if you weren't in that position, you didn't have a chance to do it anyway.
How did you get involved with Operation Baby Left?
I got involved with it because I was a flight nurse, and I was stationed at Travis, and we were in the process. The Air Force was combining the East Coast and West Coast aerovac units with their Pacific or Atlantic counterparts. So McGuire was going to be combined with Rhein-Main at Frankfurt, Germany, and the Travis group was going to be combined with the 9th group at Clark Air Base in the Philippines. And so I happened to be the alert nurse that day. We pulled alert from 8 o'clock in the morning one day till 8 o'clock the next day. Well, the alert mission came at 6 a.m. We didn't know what the mission was, which is not unusual in aerovac on urgent missions. You just get told you're doing a mission. Normally, the medical crew director gives a briefing to the aircraft commander, and the aircraft commander gives a briefing to the medical crew director. Now, on an aerovac mission, there are really 2 people in charge, depending on what the nature of them is going on. The aircraft commander is in charge of all flight safety. So if there's something with the plane, he has the last order. The medical crew director is in charge of all patient and passengers. He or she has total responsibility to the point that if the medical crew director believes the plane needs to land and they need to get on ground support, he or she has the ability to say to the aircraft commander, you need to land this plane now. And he or she can't question it. It's like they're in charge. So it's a shared responsibility. So when I walked up to Bud and I said, okay, Captain Trainer. He was a captain, I was a lieutenant. So I walked up to him and I said, well, hi, I'm Lieutenant Auntie, and I'm the medical crew director on this mission. And I introduced the crew and I said, I can't tell you anything about the mission because we don't know what it is, because we didn't know what the mission was. And he looks at me and he said, well, hi, I'm Bud Trainer. I'm the aircraft commander and I've never flown an aerovac mission in my life, so you have to tell me how aerovac missions go. And if you've never been to Vietnam in April, you have no idea how hot and humid it is. Like 95 degrees temperature and 95% humidity. I mean, it's just like you're dripping wet as soon as you land. And so he said, I'm going to close up all the doors, so come up to the flight deck. So he had the entire crew come up to the flight deck. And he and the co-pilot went in to find out what the mission was. So he comes back with this Air Force colonel from the Consonant Command Post. And they climb up to the flight deck where the rest of us were. And he said, who's the medical crew director on this mission? And I said, I am, sir. And he said, oh, well, you're going to take about 300 people out of here today, and most of them are babies under the age of 2. That was when we found out what our mission was. That's exactly how we found out what our mission was. The Vietnam War was over in '73. The POWs came home. In fact, I flew with some of the nurses after the fact because I wasn't flying at the time they brought the POWs home. I was stationed at Andrews, but they brought the POWs home on aerovac flights in '73, in February of '73, and the U.S. government left a small contingent of troops in South Vietnam because they were trying to work with the South Vietnamese government to shore it up, to let it, to enable it to be strong, which didn't happen. And by the end of '74, early '75, it became pretty apparent, I think, that South Vietnam was going to collapse. And that was when President Ford decided that we needed to get the Vietnamese orphans out of the country. The North Vietnamese were already in Saigon because when we went in, we could see all the ground fire, and they knew the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese were already in Saigon, and people were trying to get out of the city. I mean, it was just total chaos everywhere, and it was no different at the airport.
So why'd the plane crash?
You feel like talking about it?
Well, we had this discussion the other night. Yeah. Some of this has got to be off the record, and I know that's not what you're supposed to say, but the official version is that the failed on the and when it did, because the on a C5 is like a zipper, and so if you partially unzip, the whole thing unzips. The real fact of the matter is that they never really recovered enough to definitively say this is exactly what happened. They never could recover enough of the aircraft. And you have to know the flight in total was 20 minutes from the time we took off till we crash landed. It was only 20 minutes. Only 20 minutes. Yeah. Because we were at 23,000 feet climbing up when the doors failed. Oh, the book is really about one day in Vietnam because it's about the day of the plane crash. And the book, it's written by Aaron, too, who was one of the babies on the plane. we wrote the book together, so we both tell our stories, and then we show how they're connected. The people in the orphanages said often was that they didn't have names for these babies because sometimes they were left in the doorsteps at night and they were just dropped off at the orphanages. For them to leave the country at the time that they petitioned to have the babies leave the country, the Vietnamese government required that they have birth certificates. Well, a lot of the babies didn't have birth certificates, and they had to have Vietnamese names. I think she was a wealthy Vietnamese lady, got blank birth certificates from the government, and they sat there at night writing out, making up names and birthdays based on how old they thought the baby was, and then they gave them a Vietnamese name. So those even aren't their real names. When I taught at flight school, the students would say to me, do you ever try to find them? And I said, there's no way. I said, because of their names, you would never be able to figure out how to find them. But she found me. That's how we got in touch, because there was no way I could have found any one of them. You know, and then at the reunions, I met more of them. So I've met at least 6 or 7 that were on that plane that survived.
Youth is not for pleasure, but for heroism. When I seen that on the tombstone of Richard Elliott, it just tore me apart. His mom, that was her quote when she buried her son. I don't think there was truer words ever spoken about youth and heroism. That's what it's all about. So I called the family when we put this museum together and asked if I could use that verbiage to put over our wall for all the vets from Chemung County that were killed. And I think that phrase says so much. It's beyond words. It's beyond words. When you look at what that actually says, youth is not for pleasure, but for heroism. For a mother who lost her son in Vietnam to think that is absolutely mind-boggling for me. Incredible. What a wonderful lady. Yeah.